are now listening to the Paul McGUIRE report. I want to go into an instant analysis of what the larger framework was regarding the Charlie Kirk shooting. And as far as I know at the moment this is recorded, concerning the death of Charlie Kirk. And the first thing that I want to say is obviously enormous compassion and enormous sorrow for the death of any individual, but we're speaking about a particular individual now and his wife and family that are left behind. This is a tragedy, as anything of that nature would be a tragedy. It's not just him, it's anybody. But because he's a national figure, and a national figure who generated enormous controversy, it has to be examined on a larger level, and that's what we're going to do on today's program. We're not going to accept what you're seeing in terms of video feeds and social media posts. We're not going to simply take that at face value. I saw, like you have probably seen, the actual video that emerged. I don't even like saying it because it's disgusting. Okay, it's disgusting that it happened. It's disgusting that our nation has deteriorated to such a degree that this kind of thing is happening all the time. But there's a lot more to this than what I just said. There's a lot more. And unless we as people, and we as people who claim to be Christians, and Charlie Kirk was a Christian, along with his wife and family, as far as I know. So we have the hope of eternal life, but that doesn't mean we fall asleep and abdicate our responsibility in this present life or reality. So the first thing I want to say is my initial reaction was the same as yours: shock, disbelief. That's the normal reaction the instant you hear something, news of this nature. But then, very quickly, if you are operating in a healthy brain state, very quickly you go into a kind of analytical mode. Hopefully you go into an analytical mode, because if you don't go into an analytical mode, you will go into an automatic programmed response mode. And therein lies the danger. Most people in America, because of the pervasive social engineering that has occurred during the last 70 years and more, have been programmed to function entirely on their beliefs and their emotions, which used to function as a kind of psychological emotional filter. But people are no longer utilizing the psychological emotional filter of analysis, logic, and reason being applied to tragic events in any event. They have been programmed to function on an automatic response, like a machine, like a computer. It receives certain input, certain specific calibrated input, and then the individual or the mass of individuals are programmed to respond instantaneously in an emotional, non-thinking, almost primal manner. So the way that plays out is, if you have a demographic, a specific group of people, in terms of race, in terms of ethnic group, in terms of economic status, et cetera, all the things that go into making what's called a demographic group. There are specific programming techniques that can easily be used to communicate messages to your target demographic. A target demographic on a larger scale could be, for example, although it would be foolish to try to assign to any particular demographic group a completely, one set of singular beliefs. But let's say Charlie Kirk has a particular audience, or at least on a percentage basis, he's speaking to a particular audience, which would be the larger, most likely, would be people from the white race, of a particular group of age categories, a particular group of economic positioning, conservative political beliefs, and Christian beliefs that he is very vocal about. So if you want to communicate to that group, and we're going to expand the definition of communicate. When I say communicate to a target demographic or communicate to a particular grouping, you can do it in a conscious communication, or you can send a communication tailored and designed for a subconscious communication, where you're deliberately communicating not to the conscious mind. And this, by the way, if this is difficult for you to understand, then you don't even understand the basic kindergarten elements of scientific persuasion, etc. I'm talking about the easy stuff. And so this should be no mental challenge whatsoever to grasp this. And it should be no mental challenge whatsoever to understand that this kind of psychological technology has existed for a long time. That should not be a difficult mental challenge for you to overcome. So, a highly proficient system, a system could be any system of control, of power. A highly proficient system could communicate to any group through either a direct conscious communication, in which people are essentially aware of what's being communicated on a conscious level, or the more powerful communication is always, without exception, it is always without exception, the messaging that goes directly to the subconscious mind. Because if you want to impact somebody and change their behaviors or induce new behaviors or produce new behaviors, if you want to do that effectively, then you need to communicate not to just the conscious mind, but to the subconscious mind, because it's the subconscious mind where the more permanent decisions are anchored, where the will is more effectively controlled, where you have the opportunity to mold, shape, and transform an individual into doing whatever it is that it is your objective to do. That happens most efficiently when you're communicating to the subconscious mind. And it's not necessary for your conscious mind to fully understand that you have been communicated to or impacted by a subconscious communication. Most of the time, the subconscious communications you receive that transform you, as simple as a commercial, a TV commercial that you repeatedly see on television, that always fits right into one of the primary laws of public relations, one of the primary laws of advertising, which is you can change behavior, produce behavior, create personal transformation by sending a communication which consists of repetitive messages. Repetition is one of the primary laws of PR, promotion, advertising, and changing human behavior. Repetition is an essential, and it's one of the top three principles in changing behavior. The repetition of a message over and over again, because repetition is nothing more than a strategic methodology for bypassing the conscious mind and implanting your message in the subconscious mind. Now, let me say it again to make sure that we're all on the same page. The use of repetition as a scientific technique of psychological change and transformation, the whole design of repetition is to send a message on a subconscious level, or even it can begin on a conscious level. But the more you send a message, the more you repeat the message over and over again. In the process of repetition, the message, which may originally impact the conscious mind through the hearing of an individual, the visuals or seeing of an individual, those are the two primary inputs that cause an individual to be conscious of a communication. When that individual receives a repetition of messages over and over again, the brain starts to kind of subtly tune out the intensity of the conscious message. Why? Because, to put it in its most blunt terms, the human brain becomes bored with hearing the same message over and over again. So one of the ways the human mind deals with that is it allows its doorways of input into the subconscious mind. It takes the repetitive message, opens the doors to the subconscious mind, because that's where the changes in transformation and proper reception of a repetitive message goes. So the purpose of repetition is to cause a message, a behavior change message, or any kind of intended message. The purpose of repetition is to funnel that message and open the doors into the subconscious mind where it can impact and change behavior far more powerfully. So repetition in its raw essence is nothing more than a scientific psychological technique for allowing any particular message to move from the conscious mind to the subconscious mind. That's its intention. People aren't aware of these basic tools of communication that should be taught in school. It can be taught softly with titles like The Art of Persuasion. Social engineering is even a softer way of presenting this message. But for those that really know what's going on, this message would be categorized more properly and termed scientific mind control, because that's what it is. It's the controlling of the human mind through scientific and technological principles. So, this is what we've been trying to do in terms of educating people, making people aware, raising their levels of awareness, or more specific, challenging people to step up their game. And you can't step up your game until you first turn on all the functions of your mind. If you're not fully using your mental capacities, such as perception, analysis, logic, reason, comparison, and on, if you're not fully using those modalities, you're walking around in what could be called a sleep state. A sleep state is a semi-induced trance-like state where it appears for all practical purposes that you are walking around in a functional, rational, awake mind. You can drive, you can talk, you can go shopping, you can do most jobs in a state of consciousness, which if it was examined more rigorously, it would be revealed that an individual, although the individual appears to be walking around in a conscious mind state, the deeper reality is that individuals are often walking around in a very subtle but pervasive trance state. And the trance state is a state of consciousness which is not natural or organic. The trance state is a deliberately induced, altered state of consciousness that is programmed. So you can be programmed to be in a super hostile state, a super violent state, a super angry state. And nobody really seems to notice it because during most of your social encounters, you may appear distant. You may appear distant or you may not appear distant, but you are concealing your true emotional state. You're walking around in reality in an extremely hostile, angry state, a violently angry state in which you are capable of doing the most horrible things. But the altered state of consciousness, which has been induced, the trance state, which has been scientifically induced, shields observers from noticing the real state of consciousness or the real brain state an individual's in. So then when they supposedly go berserk or supposedly go insane and do the unspeakable, like in these series of murders and shootings, the most recent being the killing of Charlie Kirk in Utah, speaking to a large conference. Information is still pouring in about who the individual is. Nothing of a solid nature has been gathered regarding the background of the individual. But this is where I'm going. I'm going deeper than this. As grieved as I am over the death of innocent people, and I'm not just talking about Charlie Kirk, I'm talking about anybody that would constitute an individual being killed who is essentially innocent. Now, what we have to do to survive, what we have to do to be what the Bible calls spiritual overcomers in times of unbelievable chaos and violence. We have to step up our game. What precisely did I mean by that when I've been talking recently? I've used that over and over again. Stepping up the game in your life means that in any engagement that you're involved in, such as living, such as being a father or a mother, such as being a good human being, such as being a Christian, or whatever it is that you're engaged in, you need to learn how to step up your game in any particular area. And stepping up your game involves moving out of the zone of a kind of mediocre trance state, mind state, and a mediocre automatic response environment. What I'm saying to you is people have been programmed largely in our nation and in Western nations around the world and in communist nations around the world. People have largely been programmed just like a robot or an android or a computer, or once upon a time when AI was programmed. People have been programmed to respond in very specific responses. Let me say that again so it doesn't elude us. People have been programmed to respond to various inputs, like what they see on social media or whatever, or however they see or view things. Usually it comes through the media. Sometimes it's firsthand observation. Many times it's social media or the internet. People have been programmed to respond in very specific and predictable ways. That is not done by accident. That is done with intention. The intention is to use the science of coercion, or scientific mind control, if you will. The purpose is to use those scientific and technological methodologies to control, manipulate, and elicit specific behavior patterns. So I have been teaching on this for years because I observed a dangerous vulnerability in the lives of Christians, conservatives, and even people without any particular, political affiliation. I observed that all across American society, which is the society that you and I belong to, all across the society, there is a vulnerability that is critical to address. The vulnerability in the psychological dimension that exists in people that was created through specific programming and social engineering beginning in early childhood and developed in people by the media, the mass media, the music industry, educational system, all functioned synergistically to create people who are largely robotic in their responses and who have already largely been programmed to behave, act, or think in specific ways when they are inputted with a specific messaging context. And so I began to attempt to raise the level of awareness in people as to what was really going on, because that's the best service I could perform. It says, love one another. By this will all men know that you're my disciples. If I truly love you, am I going to leave you alone, vulnerable, and unprepared for the chaos that is now all around us? I decided decades ago, I'm not some guy who just woke up, in the last couple of years or months or whatever. I saw this coming down the road very quickly, and I decided to do something about it out of the context of my Christian faith many decades ago. And I realized I had to educate people regarding something that I knew going in would be that people would be very resistant to what I had to say. And I was prepared to be called names, and I was called names. I was prepared for the activities which were arranged in an attempt to discredit me. I was prepared for that. But I strategically began to write books, do interviews, do videos, do conferences, minister at churches, etc., where I would weave in some of the information that I'm trying to communicate to you. Again, I would weave it in. Okay, so here's a jumping off place. But before I want to do the jumping off place, I simply want to play a brief segment of the tragedy which befell Charlie Kirk, not for the purpose of exploitation or some kind of perverse titillation. Not for that purpose. For the purpose of analyzing what happens to each of us initially when we are exposed to deeply upsetting visual stimuli, auditory stimuli. In this case, the tragic shooting, the tragic killing of somebody who was attempting, whether you agree with him or not, who was attempting to do things to heal our society. Now, there are people who would be outraged that I said that. Well, you have the right to be outraged about what I've said, and you have the right to completely reject it in a peaceful, law-abiding manner. That's what holds our nation, America, together. You don't have the right to go berserk, because going berserk, you're tearing down everything. So, once again, the important thing to do here, first and foremost, is simply not emotionally react to very stirring emotional visual images and audio sounds and the words of other people. Because the words of other people, words from other people that are super emotionally charged, like all the posts that I'm seeing on social media from people that are putting up videos with their personal commentaries of witnessing the tragic event and their personal comments about seeing and hearing about the killing of Charlie Kirk. They're posting all kinds of videos as to what their response is. And what happens then is every single person that posts these videos, the overwhelming majority of them are highly emotionally charged videos. So from a scientific sense, people who are posting highly charged emotional videos are not only transferring their emotions to people all over the nation and the world via social media. There's a transference of emotions. It's like a technological electromagnetic frequency virus. It moves from person to person, and it impacts people depending upon the existing psychological and spiritual state of the individual who is hearing and seeing and viewing these emotionally charged videos and audios. And that all boils down to understanding frequencies, because everything that exists in our world comes from a variety of specific electromagnetic frequencies. And so when you're discharging your emotions, heavily charged emotions, through your comments, through your words, it impacts people. But you are communicating in a multidimensional manner. You're not only communicating verbally with your mouth and the reverberation coming from your mouth and chest and diaphragm, etc., but you are communicating your thoughts, your ideas, your emotions via an electromagnetic frequency environment. So you are transferring specific numerical electromagnetic frequencies to people that have a specific charge to each frequency. And some frequencies are the frequencies of violence. Some electromagnetic frequencies are the frequencies of joy, happiness. Some are emanating sadness and remorse. Some electromagnetic frequencies coming from individuals, coming from the mass media, coming from the internet. All of these things are transmitting electromagnetic frequencies that contain emotions, because every emotion in the emotional spectrum, every psychological state from the inner man or the inner woman is based on a specific electromagnetic frequency. So rage, anger, indignation, the desire for revenge, absolute hatred towards anybody who they perceive is guilty of this. It's all the broadcasting of not only emotions, not only a psychological state of mind, not only consciousness, but it's the transference of electromagnetic frequencies from person to person. So what you have is essentially a chain reaction. You have a social media system like YouTube or whatever, or X or whatever, broadcasting the killing of Charlie Kirk. It's horrific. It's horrible. People see that, and then they are impacted, and they either just transfer an emotional charge, or they create a specific electromagnetic frequency. They create a specific state of consciousness they create a specific set of emotions by watching or witnessing the killing of Charlie Kirk in Utah. And then that becomes contagious. It spreads throughout the culture. It spreads throughout cities, nations, and different states. It spreads. Now, the reality is, and this is where I'm saying we have to step up our game. The reality is everything that I've just briefly touched on with you, briefly described to you, all that stuff comes under the umbrella of new sciences that I began to study at the University of Missouri while having a dual major in filmmaking and the Department of Psychology, which was offering a new field of study that I was participating in called altered states of consciousness. So I've been studying this for my whole life. And so there is the scientific understanding and application of all the principles that I just highlighted for you in a very fast way. Prominent universities and think tanks like the Stanford Research Institute, SRI, MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the Tavistock Institute in Great Britain, and many other institutes and think tanks and research facilities and major universities train scientists, conduct experiments in this entire discipline, some of which is public, but the larger percentage of the information and studies that I'm alluding to are not available for public consumption. In other words, you're not allowed to see them. They would fall under the category of classified or secret. They're not available for you to see. So there are intelligence agencies, law enforcement, behavioral scientists, psychiatrists, and a whole galaxy of people studying, experimenting, and understanding what I touched on in terms of the transformation of human behavior, the transformation of somebody's mental attitude. So I just touched on it. These scientists and research facilities have spent a lifetime studying it, and tragically, yes, part of one of the major areas in modern warfare that all major nations employ is the battlefield where PSYOPs, or psychological operations, occurs, where you can program people to do things by a set formula of scientific inputs like pain, drugs, and hypnosis, which is the classic formula for MK Ultra programming. You can shatter a human personality through pain, drugs, and hypnosis, and then you can program a personality through an MK Ultra style, and MK Ultra was first developed by the Nazi mind control scientists. You can program somebody to be an assassin or a killer through MK Ultra mind control programming. And that's not, when I first started talking about that, people thought, I was deluded into thinking I came from Mars because they hadn't heard about it. But I've been talking about it for decades, writing books about it. And it's not easy for people to accept this. I talked to a group of men at a church a number of years ago, where I felt led to explain to them, because they were all in various positions of leadership and responsibility. I felt led to explain to them the basic outline of how MK Ultra mind control programming works. And one of the individuals, although sincere, I could tell his mind was reeling. I don't mean to laugh, but he had a prophetic ministry, okay? And so I felt he especially needed to hear what the basic outlines of MK Ultra were really all about, because people they don't know. And whether they know it or not, they're either being impacted by it indirectly or perhaps directly, or they're being impacted by it or affected by it on a national level. And so he heard me talk to him and this small group, I guess for about an hour, on MK Ultra programming, the dynamics of it. And I could tell because we prayed together, this group that I was involved in, we prayed together afterwards. And I could tell by his eyes that it was like, it was too much for him to handle, in one sit-down meeting. And I can understand that. But the point is, at some point, you have to grasp the basics. Otherwise, you're walking around vulnerable. You're walking around as a potential prey because you're easy to be manipulated and controlled. And you don't know what the mechanisms of that control are, and you need to know. So what I'm getting to, once again, is understanding the basic formula. Okay, so with the Charlie Kirk thing, there's going to be all kinds of news reports and investigations and false stories that come out and true stories that come out. And it's going to be a while before the dust settles and you're going to get to the truth as to who this individual was. But I can tell you my appraisal of what happened in this sense simply by the initial media/social media reaction, the internet reaction, the post reaction to Charlie Kirk tragically being shot. My initial appraisal was this, and this is what I'm trying to communicate to you. My initial appraisal was, I don't know for sure who shot Charlie Kirk based on my initial exposure to this stuff that was coming out in the media and the internet immediately after it happened. I don't have enough information to even remotely wrap my head around the intentions or motivation or whatever of the guy who shot him. That's number one. So I changed gears in my mind, so to speak, and I began to focus in on things that I could get enough information on to make some kind of determination. So just like on autopilot, I didn't even have to think about it because I, like you, and whether you're aware of the terms I'm using or not, I guarantee you that most of you have put some of the terms that I used, you have put them in practice in your own life when you're trying to assess something. So I immediately began to observe the high volume of social media posts that were instantaneously coming out within seconds of Charlie Kirk being shot. And there was initially, percentage-wise, an overwhelming tsuhami of people posting on social media and YouTube things and different video systems like Facebook and stuff. There was an overwhelming surge of people posting videos and YouTubes and stuff on X and other platforms. And all of these people had one thing in common. They almost pathologically hated Charlie Kirk. They called Charlie Kirk a beast, a monster. They thought Charlie Kirk was totally evil. And worse than that, this huge outpouring of rage was ripped open in the American psyche. And these people literally began to justify the killing of Charlie Kirk, that he had it coming, that he was a monster, that he was evil. And they were justifying and essentially praising and being thankful for Charlie Kirk being killed. So you and I can categorize that instantly on a spiritual level, both a spiritual and psychological level. Well, number one is when you allow hatred and bias and prejudice to grow in your heart for whatever reason, whether you think it's justified or not, when you allow evil to grow in your heart, it becomes a doorway for demonic entities to influence your personality because hatred grows. Hatred doesn't stay dormant. Hatred feeds off toxic emotions and it grows. And then hatred can distort your perception abilities. Hatred can amplify your bias. In effect, hatred can make you go crazy and say things and do things that perhaps you would never have said or done or even entertained years ago. Somehow, hatred has manipulated its way into your human heart and human soul, and then it always creates a massive distortion in your inner man or woman or inner personality. And so, from a spiritual level, I observed this in all the people who were making these insane posts, cheering on the death of Charlie Kirk, calling him a monster, calling for more killings. These irrational posts. And number one, there's a spiritual dimension to all of them. All the outpouring of hatred through social media was occurring because these people first opened the door of their human hearts and justified their hatred, which encouraged the growth of their hatred in their hearts. And so there was like a mob mentality surging through the American populace that I was observing in real time. And that is very, very dangerous. Now, the counter-reaction that occurred, provoked not only by the shooting of Charlie Kirk, but further provoked by all the people cheering on the killing of Charlie Kirk, all the people posting videos and YouTubes and X accounts and everything else who were celebrating and calling for more deaths and approving the Charlie Kirk killing, all those people were being watched and observed by the people who were heartbroken over Charlie Kirk's killing. They observed this tsunami and outpouring of not only murderous thoughts, but the justification and the calling for more shootings of people like Charlie Kirk. In other words, the toxic energies, the spiritual toxic energies were being transmitted out from the people who were cheering on the death of Charlie Kirk. Those who were sympathetic to Charlie Kirk were receiving these hatred emotions. And whether their intentions were right or wrong is secondary to the fact that, in my opinion, I'm not criticizing them for what they felt. I'm not criticizing them for appraising the sense of deep injustice in what was going on. I'm not being critical of that. I'm being critical about the fact that on any side of the fence that you're on, if you are not vigilant and constantly guarding your heart and mind as to what's going into it in terms of energies, emotions, the spiritual dimension, if you're not constantly watching your heart and keeping guard over the doorway to your heart and mind, then you are making yourself, whether you realize it or not, you're making yourself vulnerable to external control by forces you don't completely understand. The very sophisticated intertwining of forces like spiritual forces, demonic forces, deliberately calculated and implemented MK Ultra style forces, mind control forces, scientific mind control forces that can manipulate human behavior on the subconscious level. And additionally, the usage of frequencies and brain waves to amplify that manipulation. Most people are not prepared to protect themselves and their loved ones because they don't really know about the existence of the technologies I just talked about. And so I saw a lot of people who would probably call themselves Christians being impacted by this explosion of negative, demonic, hate-filled energy. And what they were many of them, what they were in the process of doing was the very thing that I've been trying to educate people on how to protect themselves from it. They were already going into this modality of having their own thoughts, beliefs, energy, spiritual dimension in their own inner personality. They were allowing it to be shaped and impacted by people that were cheering on the killing of Charlie Kirk, because they were seeing this tsunami of video posts and videos on X and YouTube and the other social media platforms where people were just giving their unfiltered and uncensored comments regarding what happened to Charlie Kirk. And when it first happened, the overwhelmingly large percentage of people were cheering it on and celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk and approving of it and calling Charlie Kirk a monster and evil and essentially a dictator and the man responsible for our problems. There was a feeding frenzy. But when you see that, when you observe that, it's like a psychological firestorm. If you don't get out of harm's way, I'm talking about emotionally, if you don't get out of harm's way, and by that I mean stepping aside from the velocity, if you don't step aside from the velocity and intensity of this firestorm, which is hurtling this demonic energy of hatred and confusion and chaos, that's very real in another dimension. And I'm going to say this kindly and compassionately as I can. That's why I keep saying we need to step up our game, and Christians need to step up their game. We have to be familiar, at least with the basics of the kind of sciences and technologies I've been talking about, which I've been writing about in my books for decades, like A Prophecy of the Future of America, Volume 1 and 2, where I warn about coming race wars and how race wars are scientifically created. And we're going to get into that a little bit and connect it to the Charlie Kirk event. You have to get out of the way, because if you stand there, you become a target. No pun intended, believe me. You become a target. You absorb that energy of hate, and it impacts you, whether you realize it or not. You cannot control all the triggers that it's pressing in your subconscious mind. And so I watched all these people with good intentions. They were being engulfed and impacted, and in a sense, in ways they didn't understand. They were being conquered incrementally. And on a very microscopic level, the beginnings of conquest were occurring because I was watching them become conquered by these toxic, hate-filled emotions. And they were literally morphing into different internal identities. In other words, they were moving from the state of mind of compassion and heartbreak over Charlie Kirk. They were moving from the position of being heartbroken and shocked by all the outpouring of hatred and the celebration of Charlie Kirk's death. They weren't staying in that zone. The negative information, the negative spiritual energy, and the negative psychological energy was impacting them on a subconscious level that they were not aware of. And all of a sudden, they were changing into people. I could see it in their eyes, the tone of voice, their verbiage. I can see it. And many of you could see it too. They were changing into kind of like, from being a compassionate group, they were morphing into like being a militarized, listen carefully, please. It's so important that you get this. It's so important that you pass it on. It's life or death for all of us. The people that were supporting Charlie Kirk, the people who were decrying the outpouring of hatred towards Charlie Kirk, were also being targeted with very powerful negative and destructive emotions on the subconscious level. And as such, just like the people that were celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk, the people that were mourning over the death of Charlie Kirk were subtly being weaponized. They were being weaponized because the small amount of negative energy that they allowed into their spiritual, psychological, biological being, that small amount of negative hostile energy that they allowed in by dropping their guard just a little bit, allowed for energies to come into their being, which began to transform them into a more militarized, weaponized state of consciousness where they were being set up. And they were partially aware of it, but not totally aware of it. And therein lies the great danger. They were being set up to allow themselves to be provoked into the state of consciousness where they would react with a kind of payback violence, a kind of revenge violence. That was scientifically being incited in them. It was scientifically being seeded in them to get back at those they believe that are responsible for the death of Charlie Kirk, and to get back at all the people that they thought were responsible for cheering on the death and calling for more deaths of Charlie Kirk's and others. You see, they were being conquered from within, and they didn't notice it fully. Now, this is what I've been trying to communicate to people for a long time. There's a spiritual dimension to this. It may be tough sledding for some of you because it may be new. For some of you, if you've listened to the program, it's not new. But we have to get others up to speed. I believe there is a full-scale operation, if you will, to plant seeds of chaos scientifically in the population in order to produce an outcome of a race war. And in the simplest terms, by sowing the seeds of racial violence, racial injustice, ethnic violence, ethnic injustice, both in the white community as well as the African American community and other communities, by repetitively sowing the seeds of violence, I believe that there are people in high places with lots and lots of money who are seeking to create a race war based on the use of scientific technologies transforming human behaviors in different groupings of the American people. They have wanted a race war for a long time, and you need to wake up to that fact that the end game is race war. The end game is race war, because if they can provoke violence in the streets, all they want to do is provoke enough violence in the streets, enough attacks from all sides. They want to provoke it to such a degree that it can be categorized by law enforcement and government agencies. It can be classified as a justification for martial law, military rule, and they're using the psychological bait of race wars in order to accomplish that. They've been trying to do this for a long, long time. Go back as far as Charlie Manson. I write about this in my books, like A Prophecy of the Future of America, Volume 1 and 2, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World, Power from on High. I write about these scientific techniques and give examples of them, like Charlie Manson, of the Manson family murders. He and his followers had swastikas carved into their forehead. He was obviously under the influence of scientific mind control. And he had this psychotic delusional belief that the Beatles subliminally in their White Album were in their album song called Helter Skelter, which Manson was obsessed with the Beatles song Helter Skelter. He believed that the hidden lyrics embedded in the song Helter Skelter, that it was really a message warning for and calling people to a race war. So this psychological triggering through scientific mind control and MK Ultra, there have been numerous attempts to trigger a race war in America, and especially in places like Southern California. It happens over and over and over again. So you have to step up your game. You have to be aware of all these things. You can't walk around in a state of perpetual ignorance, because it's obvious just from looking at what the media is doing. They're fanning the flames of a race war by inciting people through imagery, through their comments, through their questions to their so-called guest experts. The social media posts that are going viral are inciting violence. But this is not about violence or payback or revenge or justification. The deeper objective, the final end game, is to create race war. But even that's not the final end game. The final end game beyond race war is military rule, martial law. That's the final end game. The others are just psychological justifications and a series of psychological spiritual manipulations that are covertly designed to bring us into that militarized environment. Do you understand? Okay, you're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Be sure to visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. We'll be back in just a moment. Okay, you're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I have been through many decades and many seasons attempting to shine the light and educate people regarding the duplicity of things like incited race wars and how a race war can be produced when you deliberately use psyops to psychologically and spiritually provoke people on different sides of the fence into pathologically hating one another. And then you hope, if you're an evil person, if you're an evil puppet master, it's your hope that the people you're manipulating with technology and science, it's your hope that they will snap and go berserk for a justifiable, for what they believe will be a justifiable race war. But in reality, they're simply functioning as pawns for the greater objective of a kind of military rule. Now, you and I have to communicate, just like all these people incited by their emotions, incited by the horrific pictures of Charlie Kirk being shot and killed, barbaric and brutal. It's real, it's true. I'm not calling for its censorship. What I'm saying is, the emotions that it provokes are powerful emotions. And all the people on whatever political, social side of the fence you happen to be on, initially, the overwhelming majority of the outpourings were from people who were cheering on the killing of Charlie Kirk and celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk. It was horrible. And one can understand why that would provoke such a severe reaction among people who support Charlie Kirk. But you see, if you're calling yourself a Christian, if you're trying to do something that will effectively and strategically impact America for God and really heal America, you have to step up your game, which means you need to at least acquire a basic understanding of how these dynamics work. And then you have to, if you're going to accept any responsibility at all, look, if you and I don't accept responsibility in part for what's going on in our nation, one, we can never say that we truly repented. Two, we're being really, at a very deep level, we're being fundamentally dishonest. If we say we're not responsible, well, I didn't shoot Charlie Kirk, or I didn't post videos celebrating it, or I'm a supporter of Charlie Kirk, and I didn't, call for payback or revenge. That's not the point. If you do not choose to step into the culture, if you will, and if you don't start messaging a kind of sanity, logic, reason, restraint, if you don't start messaging an authentic spirituality where people know that you're trying to bring them up to speed about who's trying to bait us and why, if you're not involved in the dismantling of covert evil structures which seek to destroy our nation through these mechanisms, if you're not part of the solution, then you are part of the problem. And I have chosen to, every time this comes up, and it's going to come up in the next couple of days or weeks, and who knows how long it's going to last, this stuff is going to go berserk because there are people that are fanning the flames who have big bucks. Even Obama commented on this. And you need to read his messaging about the Charlie Kirk shooting. But you need to think about it. You need to think about everybody that's messaging you and influencing you. And you need to pause and take some deep breaths, like inhale and exhale. Quit getting sucked into the emotionally charged moment. And then before you lock your brain into a decision, before you lock yourself into a particular point of view, before you lock yourself into a particular emotional state or a particular analysis of what you believe happened, before you do that, you need to breathe, you need to pray, you need to separate yourself, no matter how tempting it is to go onto autopilot mode of action or reaction. You need to separate yourself from the emotionally charged events that happened. Even if it's for just a couple of minutes, you need to emotionally disconnect from it so that you can think about it in the light of God's presence and think about it in your rational mind. And your instantaneous response must always be not to allow yourself to be provoked into an auto-jerk, instantaneous, reactive, emotional reaction. You can't give in to that temptation. By the way, that is a temptation. That's a temptation that is probably more powerful of a temptation in terms of its seduction than many of the temptations that Christians love to preach about. And I'm not saying that there isn't time and a place to preach about the other temptations, but this is a temptation which is perhaps never preached about. And you need to know what the truly spiritual response is. You need to know that, because that's the only way that you can effectively deal with it. So the way the Bible says in the most simplistic terms, resist the devil and he will flee from you. So if you're being hit by a psychological and spiritual storm of toxic energy, hatred, violence, payback, revenge, murder, death, all that stuff is like in a spiritual world, which is very real, it's hurtling towards you and it can impact you. You've got to step out of the way. And you also have to move out of the way so you're not taken over by the total demonic satanic energy. I'm using more contemporary, futuristic, scientific terms, but essentially what I'm saying to you is the biblical principle: resist the devil and he will flee from you. You just don't passively, like a sponge, accept all this violence and insanity and demonic hatred. You just don't allow that to come into the core of your being, because it'll take you down. So you have to resist the devil and flee from him. You get out of the way. You're not running in retreat. That's not what it's saying. When it says resist the devil and flee from him, that's not talking about retreat from a spiritual battle. That's talking about fleeing specific demonic forces that are trying to take control of your mind, as in very high-level scientific mind control known as PSYOPs, psychological operations. You've got to dodge that, and you have to train yourself. A spiritual warrior which anyone who's serious about their faith in Jesus Christ is a loving, law-abiding spiritual warrior. As an authentic spiritual warrior, you have to train yourself how to conduct spiritual warfare. So you always incorporate the full armor of God. And that means when you're watching television, talking to people, whether you realize it or not, if you were to be able to see into the spiritual realm, you would recognize you were in an all-out spiritual war. So the Bible teaches us the importance and the necessity of putting on the full armor of God. And so daily, we're supposed to put on the full armor of God. And some of the armor is we're supposed to pick up the shield of righteousness, the shield being this giant Roman shield type that would protect a huge percentage of your body and even part of your face. The Roman shield is so large that it protects a huge percentage of your body and your face. And so if they're firing the flaming missiles or fiery darts of Satan at you, you could translate that to mean, and instead of fiery darts or flaming missiles being fired at you, you could describe the fiery missiles and the flaming darts or arrows as energy mechanisms, because that's what they are. So a bow and arrow, nobody's shooting a literal arrow at you, but they are shooting at you weapons that are psychological in nature, weapons that come from a psychological, biological, electromagnetic frequency level in terms of high-charged emotions, in terms of electromagnetic frequencies that convey and transmit. Toxic mindsets of deception, rage, and anger can all be cultivated, produced, and yes, amplified by electromagnetic frequency weapons. Okay, that's real. So that would be a contemporary synonym and analysis for fiery darts and arrows. And I don't think we're taking liberties with interpretation of the scripture to make it applicable to contemporary warfare. I think that's what the Word of God was designed to do, be applicable to whatever language, culture that it was in. So you have to pick up a shield of faith. And the same thing is true when you're dealing with spiritual, psychological, electromagnetic forces. You can't just allow them to penetrate your heart, which controls all of you. It's the center part of your being. You have to guard yourself. You don't drop the shield of faith. You're not supposed to be getting arrows and darts and stuff stuck in you and just stuck in your brain, stuck in your heart so you can be taken down. You have to have a spiritual weapon that's applicable in today's environment. So in today's environment, your prayers would provide supernatural protection. Your regular renewing of the mind. And part of the process of renewing the mind is that you uproot and you take out any potential flaming arrows or fiery darts fired at you. By renewing the mind, you're going through your mind and you're not allowing into your mind. You're not allowing into your subconscious mind also. You're not allowing into your human spirit. You're not allowing these demonic energies, these demonic electromagnetic frequencies. You're not allowing that. And the way that happens is when you renew your mind, you're through obedience to Jesus and the power of the Holy Spirit and the Word of God. In the process of renewing your mind, you're filtering out the the demonic stuff that is trying to impact and control you on multiple levels. So wearing the full armor of God is essential. The same is true for putting on the helmet of salvation. The helmet of salvation, of course, is a armor that protects your brain, your cognition, your rationale, your logic and reason, your perception. That has to be protected from external influences, external technologies. In times of old, the threat would have been from arrows or rocks or catapults or swords or spears or all kinds of weaponry that was common to the day that it was in. But in modern times or contemporary times, the weaponry will have changed. So the key is that you're to put on the full armor of God. You don't drop your shield because you're seduced by powerful emotions that are secretly on the subconscious level. They know what buttons to press in your personality. They know what makes you tick. What do you think? I'm gonna break open something at probably the deepest dimension I have ever broken it up on, because it needs to be said. I think about this a lot lately. I meditate on this in light of the Word of God. Why do I do that? Because I'm looking for answers that will help God's people. Because my goal is to communicate this freeing information to God's people so that they can use it in their own personal lives, and so that they can spread it far and wide, so that we can bring peace, love, joy in the gospel of Jesus Christ to our nation, and not death and totalitarianism. Those are the ultimate stakes of this game. So, really quickly, and I deal with this in all the books, especially the most recent book, Power from On High. I read to you a quote from Zbigniew Brzezinski, co-founder of the Council on Foreign Relations, in his book Between Two Ages in 1970. He was advocating a total control electronic surveillance society where you're under 24/7 surveillance from all kinds of futuristic technologies. He warned of that in 1970. Here we are in 2025, and those technologies are everywhere. It's Big Brother on steroids. In fact, it's no longer Big Brother. It's AI on steroids. All the stuff that you've been persuaded to by appealing to your pride and your vanity, because these are considered by at least your subconscious mind, they're status symbols. How many electronic toys that you own and possess and use has now become a status symbol? Like, do you have the latest virtual reality glasses? Are you able to watch videos or play video games in virtual reality because you purchased the virtual reality tech? What kind of cell phone do you have? And the latest laptops and computers and all the electronic toys. But they have, in addition to that, you have social media, you have email, you have all this communication, your cell phone, and you live in an electronic environment in which you were coerced through scientific mind control. You were coerced and manipulated to spend your own personal money in order to buy the bars in your own personal prison. Let me restate something I just made up and it came to me, but it illustrates what I'm trying to convey. Let me say it again to you. You were coerced and psychologically manipulated to purchase and buy with your own money the bars in your own personal prison. And by that I mean they manipulated you into believing having all the electronic toys, having the latest and greatest cell phone, the latest and greatest virtual reality tools, and all the electronic toys, the latest and greatest digital watch, and on and on and on. It's endless. And you know, you got a robot tech that can be, do vacuuming for you and talk to you. You can talk to your lights to turn them on. You can control your air conditioning or heat, with your voice, and you can ask questions to AI icons that will respond to your voice. And, got all these toys, but all these toys also, on a subconscious level at least, they are status symbol toys. The better and more cutting edge your tech is, the more you're perceived you believe as a person of importance. And so you pay for that. You pay for those toys. Now, all of the toys since the beginning were designed to do many things that, although not entirely secret, they were to whatever degree de-emphasized. Let's just use that word. All of the capabilities of all the electronic toys that you purchased had many additional capabilities that, let's just say, were de-emphasized to you, and you never really focused in on them because they were new. They were new to all of us. And what I'm talking about is every single one of these artificial intelligence, computer, virtual reality, cell phones, digital watches, computers in the cars, dash cams. I mean, it goes on and on and on at lightning speed. All of your metaverse toys, all of your electronic add-ons, all of it. And also the Internet of Things, like your refrigerator, like your microwave, and on and on and on. And the Internet of Bodies, and on and on and on. And the digital inputs and outputs that exist in your biological body that many of you don't even know about. Because, it wasn't like it was completely hidden from you. It was available for you to discover, but you showed no interest in discovering it. So all of these things have multiple capacities. Now, I have warned about the potential danger of all these multiple capacities for years. It was summed up again by Brzezinski, who said in 1970 that they were going to develop that an elite. It was the job, I'm paraphrasing now, but it's in my book. The exact quote, if you want to read it, is in From Power from On High, Volume 1. Brzezinski wrote in 1970 that an elite would assume technocratic control over society through electronic surveillance, including microchip implants. But we've gone way beyond microchip implants. You don't need to implant anything anymore. You can grow it internally, biologically. You can manipulate human DNA with a frequency from a distance, and the manipulated DNA becomes morphed DNA, which can become an organic technology unique to you and programmable, energized, and run through your own DNA. But some of you don't even know what I'm talking about. We'll have to save that for another day. So you need to be aware of what's happening. All the technologies and the electronic toys have a very common capability that is usually de-emphasized. They have the capacity, if they are not already, and I'll leave it up to you. I know the answer, and many of you know the answer, but for those of you that don't want to go there now, I'll leave it up to you to come to a conclusion based on your own research. Because when you conduct your own research, then you'll own the truth. And then when you own the truth, you become passionate about it. So these gigantic buildings in Utah in the middle of nowhere, you've seen the pictures. They're massive, massive data storehouses. These massive buildings, these massive tech buildings in Utah are massive data warehouses, data storehouses that control practically an infinite amount of bytes of information about you based on surveillance and measurement technologies. So everything you do is metadata. Everything you do, everything you think, everything you believe, every action, every behavior, every choice in buying, selling, attitudes, mindsets, they can monitor from a distance. No, this is all provable. It's all documented. If you want to argue, that's fine. You can argue with yourself in front of the mirror. I don't have time to argue with you. The documentation has been out there for years. It's your job to read it. The days are over of me debating whether or not it's true. I mean, I allowed that to go on too long. It's over. The information is overwhelming. You choose whether or not you want to accept the information or reject it. That's the end of that, period. One last chance. Do you understand what that means? That's what the Lord said to me in a prophetic dream. One last chance. So everything that you are about on any level, your blood pressure, whether you're depressed, whether you're elated, whether you're, I don't want to say it, some people will be offended, but let's just call it the act of marriage. Whether you're involved in the act of marriage or not, can all be electronically measured from a distance because your human body, brain, and soul is broadcasting wirelessly from inside you more data than you could possibly imagine, which is being stored and recorded. Now, don't ask me why they need to store and record all that data, but they do. In addition, any belief system you have, it's like the movie, again, with Tom Cruise, Minority Report, where they would arrest people for pre-crime. That means they would arrest people in the future for crimes they had not yet committed, but their artificial intelligence police system had all kinds of precognitive sensors and pre-crime data sensors. Through analysis by AI, they could determine from electronically evaluating your personality whether or not you would ever commit a crime, what kind of crime, and they got it down to such an exact science that they could predict whether or not you would commit a crime in a certain location, exactly what crime would be done to who and when, and all the specific details. So in the future, they would arrest you before you actually committed the crime. They would arrest you when they had conducted enough data analysis to determine exactly when and precisely how and why you would commit a certain crime. So instead of allowing that crime to play out and then arresting you, in the future, they'll just arrest you before you physically commit the crime based on their pre-crime data. And notice in the movie, there's a secret giveaway in that movie. Remember, the widow of Philip K. Dick, the guy who wrote the sci-fi novels that all these blockbuster movies like Minority Report were written based on Philip K. Dick's novels. And his wife was a big fan of Doug Hagman and a big fan of my work when I would appear on his show, and we'll be back on his show soon. So in that movie, notice that it's primarily computerized artificial intelligence data collection. Got it? Remember, I think it was 3. I don't remember if it was 3 or 2. But you remember the movie, and I'm asking you to remember what occurred in the movie Minority Report. They're these like female entities, these beings. It's either 2 or 3 of them, and they're floating around in kind of a tank, and they're bathed in kind of a white light, and they look. You can't quite figure out what they are. They look like almost angels. They look like some kind of transhumanist entity from the future. But they possess these entities, whatever they are in the movie Minority Report, they work in conjunction with the AI, artificial intelligence computers. These female-like entities have supernatural clairvoyant power. They're able to see into the future through very, very advanced high-end psychic abilities. So what the movie, what Philip K. Dick is communicating to us in the movie is that in the future, and this is what his wife, not his wife, his ex-wife, his widow, Philip K. Dick's widow, who would listen to me on Doug Hagelman's show. It's one of the things I'm going to ask her about. He was getting information from somewhere, and it was embedded in his novels, which became, depending upon the director, Minority Report was directed by Steven Spielberg. The information was, I believe, passed on by Spielberg. I could be wrong. I don't think Spielberg invented the cognitive entities, the precognitive entities. That was a communication to the audience, that's you and I, that in the future, not only will people be arrested for pre-crimes through artificial intelligence computers, but that authorities will employ supernatural entities, like in these 3 or 2 female-type precog entities, bathed in white light, who had supernatural power as clairvoyants and supernatural power to see in the future and see into the future through their psychic powers, whether or not pre-crimes were coming. So what the movie is communicating is the unholy alliance between artificial intelligence computer pre-crime data and the merging of that with clairvoyant psychic entities that are able to see into the future utilizing supernatural power. The 2 sources of power, machine computer and supernatural entities, interdimensional entities, from where we don't know, what dimension we don't know, are joined together. That was communicated to us in terms of a precognitive communication. It's a messaging on a deeper level of something that is to come in order to prepare us. I believe, and many people believe, that possibly comes about through an allegiance to a set of beliefs which requires those believers to communicate what they're going to do to a population or group or individual. They have some kind of moral karmic obligation to alert them before they do it. Now, there's lots of questions about that, and I don't want to get into it right now. I want to close with this admonition. You've got to train yourself and teach others how to train themselves not to simply react. You have to pause and live in that pause state and allow yourself spiritually to process the information that's coming at you, which is highly charged. Otherwise, you're going to be easily manipulated, and there are people who want to see social chaos, and a race war. This is part of the spiritual battle we're in. I need your help in your financial donations and your contributions. So I'm asking you to go to paulmcguire.us, and we need your help in communicating this message. You just can't absorb it privately. You've got to pass it on. We are the only antidote for peace, love, and reconciliation. If we don't pass peace, love, and reconciliation through our society, the demonically charged forces of hatred will spread, and we will be engulfed by them. Visit paulmcguire.us, stand with us, and join us.